Trying to make sure that I'm recording. Oh, share sound. There you go. Okay. Okay, everybody. I think we're going to do good now. Okay, very good. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about this course because I learned. My people taught this 10 years ago, not to the day, but it was a 2014 course for JLI, one of the new ones that are coming out. So it's been there, but it's always been something that I've just enjoyed reading because it's history and it's very relevant and it really ties history to answer some burning questions for us today. So just to give a quick overview of the class, the course we're going to do, today about identity crisis, the changing Jewish self-concept that happened particularly by Napoleon. I want to talk about next week free to serve, the conflict between Western freedom and Jewish life, particularly in America. The doing it my way, the collapse of traditional Jewish community structure that was unique to America versus Europe. And we're going to do the last one. We're not doing all 6 classes. We're going to do finding motivation to live as a Jew with anti-Semitism being discussed there. And we'll touch a little bit. We're not going to do the full thing, but we're going to talk about this man who we saw by Rabbi Herman's class lecture about Manasseh in Israel. Okay, but let's talk about identity crisis, the changing Jewish self-concept. So there's a lot of jokes about Jewish identity. I grew up with my parents telling me all the Jew trying to get into the country club joke. There's it never ended. There's endless jokes. One this comes to mind is a Jewish guy in the 30s really wanted to go to, what's the country club here? The Oak Hill. He wanted to go, no Jews were allowed. So his friend said, okay, you can't just say you're in shmatas and textiles. Say you're in the garment industry, you can't be, Reuben, Leibstein, you got to be Richard Livingstone III and make all the necessary changes to hide your identity. So he goes through all of them. What's your favorite hobby? Polo. What's your, where do you live in the exclusive gated community? All the questions. So he goes to the interview and he goes through them. What's your name? Richard Livingstone III. What's your job? Garment, fashion industry. What's your, all the questions. They say, what's your religion? He's like, Goy. He didn't realize. So there's another chair there. And there should be an extra booklet. Okay. So let's talk about 10 years ago. It could be they did another one since, the Pew study about Jews, how many identify in what way. And there was a lot of shocking things in the sense of, they asked what is essential to being Jewish. So 42% said having a good sense of humor, more than being part of a Jewish community, meaning this is where the answers were. And 19% were said observing Jewish law is essential to Jewish identity. This is the full spectrum of Jewish America, and probably 10 years ago. I don't even want to ask the questions they put on the ballot in the survey today, but you can see it's a very changing thing. I see it myself. Every 5 years, you see the change. Chabad rabbis and rabbis on campus see it really. It's my brother-in-law in U of R, he tells me that the amount of students when he first started that took off at least one day, one day Rosh Hashanah was very high percent, and now it just lessens by year. So this is an interesting thing we got to deal with. So let's do a opening question. And I want you the person next to you, discuss it for a minute so we can get each pair's, a little bit of collaboration. Let's have 2 questions. What is the greatest benefit to living as a Jew in the free world? And what is the greatest challenge to living as a Jew in the free world? big prelude to this question. Remember, for 2,000 years, we weren't in a free world. We had a lot of, we'll talk about the good and the bad of that. There was, first Jewish identity, there was some good of being forced in the shtetl. Once the shtetl were ripped down and the Jews let free, there's challenges. So can you think what's the greatest benefit after that became open society, or the beginning of a free world? And what is the greatest challenge? So please take 60 seconds to talk to the person next to you and see if you can give a collaborative answer.
What am I scared? Why? It's true. That's it's almost like it's become very easy, very few. So it takes efforts. And then some I always say that creates the great challenge. So you can't say it on this. Yeah, you do have I don't know, not even your parents. I don't.
Elisheva, do you hear us? The Zoom?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, 10 more seconds and we'll continue.
I think that's about, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really go on period of time, at the time, I thought that it's conservative tributes, yeah, the terms, declarations. Yeah, but now and whatever, it's just thinking it's a big 6 years, so it's much more in advance. Like, get rid of it.
Okay, let's bring it together. So I'm sorry. So let's start here. What was pair number one's greatest benefit, greatest challenge?
Well, all right. The greatest benefit is the freedom to choose where to live, what to do, what kind of just the freedom of choice. And you could still be an observant Jew or yes, just a Jew.
Greatest challenge?
I assume that as Jews become more secular, because you have food choice, it's a little harder to bridge the gap between communities.
It's hard. So because Jews are just doing their own thing, essentially, everybody has their own little interests. So there's less unity. We're not like roped into the Warsaw Ghetto, so we like it's harder to get us to come to events. I know I'm a professional Jewish cat herder. Like I know I wish we lived in a ghetto and I could just yeah, next. Greatest benefit?
It's always got something similar. It's you have the freedom to choose what you want to do, where you want to do it,
Right.
how you want to do it.
A challenge?
People are becoming assimilated, losing their Jewish identity.
Greatest benefit, greatest challenge? Same, different, tweak.
The benefit is like you free.
Right. Self-actualization, freedom.
Well, we mentioned that in Israel, the majority of people, Jewish people, are not religious, but they kind of live by Jewish calendar. And
right.
If you talk to Israelis, the comparison, no, just like
right.
But
so I think Israel's a unique. I think that's a separate class because it's a unique experiment.
well, it's your ghetto.
Right, exactly. That's a good point, right? I mean, some sort of self-made ghetto, right? Interesting. And the greatest challenge, that's the benefit.
Challenge is to be Jewish, like, look.
Why? You're free to be Jewish. No one's stopping you. But you're free not to be Jewish.
Just accept, like, it's not the norm.
Right.
I mean, it's like.
You can do other stuff.
And other stuff, it's like, I mean, it takes more effort to follow wherever you want to follow.
Right.
Follow, because the norm is not, so you have to be, so you have to take energy.
Right. It's not automatic.
Yeah.
Like in Israel or in the ghetto of old, it's a benefit challenge. Same idea.
No, we all agree.
So it sounds like, it's funny. I mean, the cute little course writer is saying it's the same answer. Freedom is the greatest benefit. Freedom is the greatest challenge. It's like, it's a funny thing. Like, it's this double-edged sword. It's wow, you could do whatever you want, Jewishly, professionally, and now you can also opt out. And it's easy to opt out or not opt in, as you're saying. It's the energy.
Is this a Jewish issue, or is this a
That's a really good question.
universal issue that the more freedom you have, are you less inclined to?
Like how are the Catholics and the Protestants doing? I don't know. You have to go to CLI, Christian Learning Institute, down the street. I don't know exactly, but I'd imagine you have a good point. Like it's, I think we'll see Jews are unique to some degree, but I think a fourth generation Muslim, or Indian,
Why I think Catholic, because Catholic was, at one time, you had more
right.
Also, we clearly have less over there.
Right.
So everything that would be
Okay. So so it's very interesting. Before the Enlightenment, for thousands of years, I'm not talking about when the Jews were in Israel like 2,000 years ago and they had kings and stuff. Even when the Romans exiled them and they were all over the world, right? Due to outside circumstances of persecution and ghettos and whatever, the Jewish life was not a choice, and it was totality. It was forced upon you, which makes our question of how to be a Jew in the free world a really hard one. Because if this is rooted in a reality where there was no choice, just circumstantially, right? Like the Romans said, you're a Jew, and you're a Jew, and you're a Jew. So, and you had no choice to not be a Jew. So now when we have the choice, and we'll talk about how that happened and what that did when it happened, it's a hard question. And in truth, it wasn't necessarily a Jew till then. It wasn't, they didn't grapple. They didn't have to what does it mean to be a Jew? Every year, the last Federation director, or two of them, I forget, Larry Fine, he used to, every year by the dinner, he'd say, what does it mean to be a Jew in the 21st century? It's like every single year is that question, because it's obviously a question that, people grapple with. And now we can imagine post-October 7th is a bigger, the stakes are higher for that question. Back in general in the world, how much choice did people have? If your father was a butcher, you're going to be a butcher. You're born into your father was this guild member, you're going to probably do that, right? You're born this religion, you're going to stay in the same 500 yards and die in the same 500 years with that, and marry your cousin and whatnot. So there wasn't a lot of, overall, there wasn't that much, mobility. Only modernity, now there's choice, and we'll learn that it became fashionable theories of self-determination, where now this question it was an issue in 1789 by the French Revolution, and it became just bigger and bigger as time went on for Jewish people. What's interesting is this question wasn't asked so much. Like, what do you mean was a Jew? It was like that was what a Jew. I mean, like, give or take something like that, It's interesting. I will just didn't have this in the textbook, but what's interesting about Jewish sources, a lot of questions that weren't relevant for the beginning of time, and they became relevant, like electricity. It wasn't just, what does the Bible say about electricity? It doesn't say anything. What does the Talmud say about electricity? didn't exist. The rabbis didn't talk about it, but the fundamentals are there. So while it wasn't maybe like a hot topic, like what does it mean to be a Jew and this, there's a lot of just the scholarship touches upon fundamental ideas that later we can use those fundamentals to answer questions. This applies to halacha. This applies also to big worldview ideas, philosophy ideas like this. So I think while it wasn't maybe asked that much, the rabbis did do talk about what to do, but from a very like technical perspective. But here it became a question that everybody has to ask because you can easily opt out. And so what was a Jewish meant a manner of dress and speech and mannerisms, and much of prayer and precepts, which is funny. Maybe that's where Jewish humor came into like, there's a lot of books on Jewish humor. It's rooted in like the mannerisms and the realities of Judaism. It's, maybe it wasn't Bible and say this is thou shalt have a Seinfeldian humor, but it kind of developed maybe. As Jonathan Sachs says, a complete culture woven out of a religious cloth, and religiously based, but a very cohesive life cycle culture. Okay, but that's very nice when you live in the ghetto and there was no choice, but we are not in the ghetto, and how do we answer it? So let me show you a quick video. Oh, I'm sorry, the video's up there. My apologies. Back to as okay. So learning exercise number one, before we do the video, someone read learning exercise out loud, just for the benefit of the recording and everybody. So Emma, would you like to read it?
Sure.
All right, read learning exercise 1.
Felicity barely out of a living in Baltimore, Maryland, looking for XYZ preparation. You have a great deal of stress trying to make ends meet and living to the food. On the other hand, part of a vibrant Jewish community and have opportunities for Jewish learning and the ability to live a life that's fully Jewish. One day you get a call from the CEO of XYZ and he says, going to make some decisions in the next 6 months that will affect our company and your future. As you may sense, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to advance in our company while working at our Baltimore location, and will likely be stuck in your current position for many years. However, the company may choose to relocate to Yazoo City, Mississippi, population 11,323. If the company moves, you would assume a position that will likely give you enhanced job satisfaction and that will provide you with 3 times your current salary.
Next page. It's one more page.
Oh, well. When you do a Google search on Yazoo City, Mississippi, find out that Mississippi is the only state that does not have a permanent Chabad.
2014. Since then, they do have one, but not in Yazoo City. City.
The nearest daylight class is 150 miles away in Memphis, Tennessee. Obviously, the quality of Jewish is poor. Shoshana is summing up, and when you go to synagogue to pray, which options should you pray for? Should you pray to the company? One, decide not to relocate so that you can keep your present job in Maryland, or should you pray that the company will relocate to Mississippi? Life will be so much better from an economic standpoint.
Really?
Was, I was at Duncan, Oklahoma on Halliburton there. And they had the ideal job for me.
Oh, wow.
And, but Oklahoma City is where the nearest synagogue is. And, the Jews in Duncan, Oklahoma.
So let's take 60 seconds so we can do another think, pair, and share of think about it for 30, 60 seconds. The pros and cons of either one. Of let's go quick, we'll do a little quicker this time. So just talk to your neighbor of what you think, would be a reason to or to not take the job or pray for the job to fall through and stay where you are.
My wife first thing.
So. Probably can drive. It seemed very strong. And the chance we were starting up the road to letting all our piece. Yeah. Yeah. Good job. Like today. The choice. Is.
Okay. Let's start, they're still talking. So what do you have to say?
Pencil, please.
I was just giving an example that I feel like I made similar choice because being Jewish in New York, I lived for 10 years was much easier. And actually I started in Rochester, New York, and never could have very Jewish here. Never kind of looked for Jewish life in Rochester. And I moved to New York and it was just really for given to me on a plate.
Wow.
You know, going to a kosher, like I was pomegranate in Brooklyn, where
Right.
kosher and you know,
Right.
and I moved back to Rochester and everything was much more complicated. Have a Lippmann store, look at the, you know, Wegmans house and so, but.
Right. But it's not Yazoo City. It's a little, there's levels, you know?
Right. And I'm sure.
I mean, New Yorkers would think this is Yazoo City, you know?
And the Yazoo, right, New York, here is Yazoo City, but, look, you make economical and choices as
Right.
to you, who you wanna be.
Anybody else want to share with their thoughts of this, pro to moving to Yazoo City?
Absolutely, but if you think about, you Jews have been everywhere, gone everywhere, part of like fun. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I like this choice is still.
So that's exactly what we're going to point out. This is why we're asking the theoretical question, the dilemma question. We're going to look to history. We're going to look to history too.
Like, yeah, that's.
No, Pittsford. I'm living on the prairie. It's so hard.
You know, go back to, there's no question, because today living in a ghetto is the choice. It's more expensive.
Right.
Everything kosher is more expensive, everything.
Everything's more expensive.
But if you make that choice, no, it doesn't matter what you're.
And 80% make that choice, probably, you know.
The Orthodox.
Yeah.
It's more than 80%.
Right.
It's
It's very hard.
about any aspect.
I'm saying 80% of the Orthodox or 90% will make the choice to move in town to an expensive city Jewish enclave. Yeah. Yeah, for some reason.
Matter what the profession.
Right.
That's only.
I was just in 5 towns the past 2 days. Cedarhurst is amazing. Like more than Brooklyn. It's just an amazing Jewish town. It's like a nice picturesque town. But like just as an example, it's so Jewish. It's run. The municipality is run by Orthodox Jews because that's the, you know, like they have like Tuesday night, you know, summer, you know, in the Buckland Park concert. It's all Jewish bands. It's like God Elbaz. Like that's like the funny. Like I can't even fathom such a reality. My niece lives there. Right? So it's a question that happened again and again. He says Jews did make this question many times in different scenarios. We're going to talk about one of them. Let's talk about France. Okay.
The turmoil that shook Europe in the late 18th century transformed the world, both politically and economically. In 1789, the French Revolution violently overturned the monarchy of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. 10 years later, Napoleon Bonaparte took advantage of the instability in France by engineering a coup and installing himself as the supreme leader of the country. Over the next decade, Napoleon's powerful armies strode across the continent of Europe, conquering countries and promising liberty and equality to all mankind. To the Jewish communities of Europe, Napoleon's promises of freedom seemed almost messianic. For centuries, life for the Jews had been unbearably oppressive due to anti-Semitic legislation. Jews were restricted in terms of where they could live, which occupations they could practice, and where they could travel. They were unable to own land. Oppressive taxes were imposed upon them, and expulsion orders and pogroms were commonplace. Napoleon offered the Jews of France, the Netherlands, Western Germany, and Italy the first intimations of modernity. With full civic and economic rights, Jews now had the opportunity to participate freely in public and political life. The walls of the ghettos of Europe fell, and the Jews could walk out free. However, these freedoms and the resulting assimilation of Jews into French life soon presented a challenge to the continuation of Judaism as a unique religion, culture, and lifestyle. For Napoleon's intentions were not respectful of Jewish life. He viewed the Jews as lowly and saw himself as doing them a great service. In return for his help, Napoleon expected the Jews to change. As a result, in 1812, when Napoleon turned his sights on conquering Russia, Jewish leaders were divided. Should they support Napoleon or the Russian Tsar? Millions of Jews lived under extreme oppression in the Pale of Settlement, and many hoped that their hardships and poverty would be alleviated under Napoleon's rule. But was it worth the risk?
Okay. So, okay. So there was a big discussion, different Jewish leaders, I don't know if most, but I would imagine many. We're talking religious Hasidic leaders, very big rabbis and their flocks. Great, this is a good thing. It's miserable, the economic, the deadbeat job had nothing on the miserable economic situation of the Pale of Settlement. Napoleon was promising freedom and all the liberties that come with that. So what's interesting to note is that the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, before we do this, I would like to read, actually, no, we'll do this first. I'm sorry. So Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, big scholar, very respected at the time. Surprisingly, I don't know if he was the minority opinion, I'm not sure, but I grew up with this story. This is a very big part of Chabad history. And the story is like this. He wrote in a letter, and he did more than that, we'll see. He said, if Bonaparte will be victorious, the cause of Israel will be lifted up, and there'll be much wealth in Israel, economic prosperity, but the heart of Israel will be separated, removed from their Father in heaven. And therefore, he supported the Tsar. Supported the Tsar, not just like in theory, like from the pulpit, vote for the Tsar. It wasn't voting, but it was, he actually, he told some of his top Hasidim disciples to act as spies for the Tsar, because what would happen was when Napoleon would conquer a part of Eastern Europe or any country, you need the locals to give you a little bit of the lay of the land and translate, to explain the policies and whatnot. So he had one of his Hasidim. There's a very famous story. Most Chabad kids, probably 10 years old enough, know the story, that he had a follower, was a very a polyglot in many languages, and he served as a translator for the French army. His name was Moshe Meislish, and but he was a spy, and he actually got very high access of some military campaign preparations, and he would tell them to get it to the channels to the Russian army, what the French are planning. And there's a famous story that he said he had one particular harrowing encounter with near death. So basically, the story goes that he was very well liked, and he was used as a translator for the French general or of that area. And they were in the boardroom, and there was a lot of secrets flying around. And suddenly Napoleon walks in, like unannounced. Everybody's freaking out, and he's barking, what's going on? And who's this Jew, you're a spy. So, and there was no like, this is totally unexpected. So, and he did like a lie detector test. He put his heart right away in his hand on his heart to see if he starts beating his heart. But he said, Rabbi Moshe Meisler said, that Tziddik meditation saves my life. So what's the whole Tanya about? That the mind doesn't have to give in to the default emotions. You have mind over heart, and he was able to say, "I was hired as a local to train," and he passed the test. So that's a story that was very, big part of my upbringing. But anyway, I wanted to say this. I want to say that before we go to, so this is a story. I heard this as a kid. I heard this as a teenager. It's very famous. Not just a Chabad. It's well known. And other Hasidic masters, huge, followership. They were saying, no, like we disagree with you. There's always an anti-Semite. His policies have been for 100 years anti-Semitic. Napoleon, let's try our luck with Napoleon, right? So there was an argument. Okay. Happens to, ultimately the Russians won. But the way I understood the story, so I really read this course, was, there's always understanding it. So before I tell you how I understood it, this is called the Tsaros theory. So we're not going to read it because I don't want to get bogged down with too much text because we have a lot more to cover. If you want to read the text too on your own, I'm just going to paraphrase it. Alan Dershowitz, in his book, The Vanishing American Jew, In Search of Jewish Identity for the Next Century in 1997, he quotes this story. And he says 2 points. One, that external pressures help us stay Jewish. Everybody is putting us in the ghetto and hates us and refuses to, let us fraternize with them. It's miserable and mean, but it keeps us Jewish. The Tsaros theory. Tsaros is in hardships, tsarot. And then he says, and he quotes this story saying how if you have choice on the table, the Alter Rebbe, spiritual continuity, Jewish religious continuity, or economic prosperity, what do you pick? Spiritual perpetuation. But he conflates the two. He thinks like it's the same thing. I mean, he makes it sound like the Alter Rebbe was saying, like, we need to suffer. So therefore, first we're like the suffering. The guys of freedom, look at today. Look at America today. We can't do America. We can't do free world. We need hardship. So as a religious, engineer for the future, let's pick the harder. That's not that. This is what Alan Dershowitz conflates it to. These are two separate things, and it's not necessarily that Rabbi Shir Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, held that we must suffer. It's great to suffer for Jewish continuity. Yes, he did pick spiritual perpetuation of Jewish identity over the material benefits, but not necessarily because it's good to suffer to be Jewish. So the way I understood the story, the way I understood the story was just like that. Like, not that we have to suffer, but it's well, I guess I did understand like that. It's like we can't do. I guess I thought I understood different, but I guess as my teenage mind, it was kind of the same thing. Like it's all freedom, secularization, assimilation. We're done in 3 generations. Hardship, it's stick with the Jewish thing, and there's vibrant Jewish communities. But we're going to see in this course, with a little more research, that's not what he meant. He did not subscribe that we have to suffer to stay Jewish. So if you look in text number 3, text number 3. So this is from Rabbi Dovber of Lubavitch. This is after Rabbi Shir Zalman passed away. his successor, his son, Rabbi Dovber, wrote a letter to the guy I mentioned, right, Moshe Meisels, who was very involved in this, campaign. And he wrote, could be it was maybe all his I don't know if his father was alive or not, but he wrote kind of like addendum of he's after. Close to his passing, Rabbi Zalman said, when God will bring the Tsar success and all his enemies will fall before him, he will certainly remember the Jews and raise their status and establish them firmly amongst them all types of permanent liberties. Meaning, he wasn't hoping that the Tsar would continue to treat the Jewish people. We'll see that we supported him for whatever reason we supported him, not necessarily just for cronyism, but the hope is maybe he will give some level of freedom. Oh, so what's the difference? So before we get to there, this is very novel to me. That this is not the way I understood. It's not the way most Chabad, young rabbis understand it. So we can't understand what Sarah's theory that, look, imagine if American freedom would have happened in 1800. Like, would Jews, like, would we be here? Very likely not, right? So at least he bought us 100 years. So the assimilation started later, give or take, right? Because we can't do freedom and stay Jewish on a large scale level. But now we're seeing this new bit of evidence that he was hoping there would be a little bit of freedom. Then the question is, what's the difference of Napoleon and the Tsar? Like, why was he detested Napoleon? He detested what Napoleon stood for. He said, you want freedom. Is that what he stood for? So we're going to see that let's actually go to text number 4. I'm just going to paraphrase again because I like to keep to a time limit. I'll read the first verse and the last verse. It says in the Torah, Moshe is warning the Jews about a little like preview of what will happen, very likely. Be very careful you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his mitzvot, his laws and his statutes. And I'm commanding you today, son, he says, what's going to happen is you're eventually going to go to the land, you're going to eat, be satisfied, good houses, flocks and silver and gold and a lake house and everything that you have prospers. Your heart is going to become haughty and you may forget God. And this is the key words. You will say to yourself, my strength, my might of my hand have accumulated this wealth for me. Meaning it's very common that when a person is, when you're struggling with the startup, you're praying, you're really humble, you're vulnerable, so you're praying to God, you're sense other people. When he becomes a billionaire, that's where they say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's a very common human pattern. And this is why he was very anti-Napoleon. Napoleon, we're going to see, was not the freedom like we have in America. Which is very different. Like, I didn't know this until I read this course a few years ago and then reread it today just to, I did a little research as well. Napoleon wasn't nothing like American freedoms we're talking about. It was freedom from religion, but it was freedom from religion and, allegiance to the state. The Tsar, the hope, this is not what happened, but his hope was that maybe the Tsar, after seeing the Jews support him, there'd be some more civic freedom, but with a holy environment. What does it mean the Tsar be a holier than Napoleon? They're both pretty miserable, dictators. So he said, the strength in my hand. So here's a couple things. Napoleon is let me move this away. That's how it works out. Napoleon, the self-made man. Napoleon was a denier of God. He thought his strength brought his success. He had such arrogance that he kept on going into Russia, where nobody beat Russia, but he was invincible. He didn't care about the warning signs. And his underlying philosophy of godlessness was this was what was a danger to the content of Jewish living. That's interesting, and I googled there's actually from the new movie Napoleon. They have this the scene that the protocol was the Pope would put the crown on the monarch, and he puts it himself. They had a line that he says, "I picked it up out of the gutter," but they said, "I just mentioned it wasn't." They didn't say that then. He said it later in a letter, but they just dropped. He broke because he wanted to show I crowned myself. I made myself. Man, as me being the perfection of man or best of men. I made this happen, and this is the Alter Rebbe felt this was very dangerous for Jews. And we're going to see how this actually played out. Now, you might say, okay, the guy's not great. He's an arrogant, godless person. But look, he was committed to giving, liberty, brotherhood, and equality. So, do you want every politician to be Abraham Lincoln? I'm saying, like, what do you expect? Like, he's giving some pretty good stuff. But why is his personal belief system so detrimental? Did the Alter Rebbe feel, Rabbi Shazam feel, to the continuity of Judaism? And not so had it been freedom from the Tsar. I think the Tsar would have been the one, because the Tsar there's still belief of, God gives the divine right of kings and all that. And his freedom wouldn't have been as bad. Why is this like belief or denial of God being for a ruler so dangerous, or make it or break it? Okay, so we're going to get back to that later, how this played out, but let's talk a little about Jewish identity. So we're going to do the little running exercise. You can use a pencil, you can just say, I think we're going to skip that because it's kind of obvious. Let's go to text number 6. Okay, once again, I'm going to paraphrase. You can read it yourself. This is from a man who was a very famous psychiatrist. He passed a few years ago, Abraham J. Tversky. Can I get a bottle of water? I'm sorry. Thank you. And he writes about a story of Chelm. Now, Chelm, are you familiar with the Chelm stories? Chelm was a place in Poland that was a good, regular place on the country. If anything, they had scholars. But for some reason, they got a bad rap being a city of fools. And a lot of stories are told about their, catch-22 foolishness. So he talks in this paragraph, you can read it yourself, but I'm just going to paraphrase out loud. Person who doesn't have an identity, a deep knowing of self, they try to find that identity by belonging to something like an ideological movement. So they say, well, I'm not great. I have low self-esteem, or I'm not sure who I am, but I belong to this wonderful movement. Another technique for identity, of obtaining identity, may be trying to get prestigious positions and titles. Like, who are you? Who am I? I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a business owner, and so on. Or I'm or you can judge yourself by I'm the owner of a mansion, a luxurious automobile, whatever it is. So the story, I'm just going to say it outside, is so in the city of fools of Chelm, there was like every olden Eastern city, there was a bathhouse. You'd go there once a week, whatever it was, to bathe yourself. Now the problem is, so one of the goers of Chelm had this problem. He's like, I'm going to go in there, no clothes, no one has clothes. How am I going to know who I am? So what am I going to do? So he says, I'm going to have a competitive edge to know who I am. I don't want to I can't take chances here. I'm going to put a big red string on my big toe. And then, and no one else has the red string. I'll know that's me. The guy with the big red string in the toe. So it's great. He's going, scrub-a-dub-dub. And unfortunately, the string slips off. And to make matters worse, the string goes in somebody else's toe. So now he's very confused. Like, I don't know, who am I? And that's the. So he goes over to the guy and he says, "Excuse me, I know who you are, but I'm lost. Can you tell me who I am?" And that's the end of the funny City of Fool parable. And it's really, it sounds very like funny, but in many ways is what we do. We ignore the question of who we are, or we don't have the tools. I'm not blaming anybody. We don't spend a lot of time on this, or maybe modernity distracts us from this, or we have other concerns that we have to deal with. And then we have, what's our answer? I'm a doctor. I'm a Bills fan, Bills Mafia. You know, that like people can take this identity thing because you find something important and you pin yourself on that. But we can imagine this is a big malaise in society. We know ourselves how much, or to what degree, or when we've suffered from this in this issue. So I do want to do questions for discussion, and then we'll go on to the next part. And let's go to the possible definitions of what is Judaism. So you can answer, is it a cultural identity? Is it a religious identity? This is on page 11. A religious identity, a national identity, no matter what you do.
Seems like this would be very profound competing forces, because if you say, if you want to prioritize, one person may be observant, another person may see Tikkun Olam, and
I know, it's good. It's really different. I don't have an answer. Let's try to look. I don't know if I'll answer. Maybe it's not one answer. Maybe it's a little bit of all. Maybe it's a little bit. Maybe it's a few. Maybe I'm not saying, oh, it must be me religious. I'm not. That's not the right answer won't be religious. Let's go through. Let's identify. So let's talk about yeah, for sure. No, I would like to. So let's go. Cultural identity. Is it cultural identity? Yes, no, partially. Okay, right. Okay, so well, let's go back. Religious identity. It can't be that, because we see a lot of Jews are atheists, but they identify as Jews, and if you're very sure, not just like a game. I think it's kind of rare, or not heard of, for an atheist Muslim, atheist Christian. It's not mean you believe, you're in. You don't believe, you have to be. In Judaism, it's very common. I don't believe, I question, I'm agnostic, atheist, but I'm Jewish. And there's a real feeling there. It's not just like nostalgia. So to call it the way we call other religions, it can't be what we typically call religious identity. Now, a cultural identity, identity would mean a shared set of values, foods, language. I'm missing some other things. Do all Jews have that? Is that a given? Every Jew likes bagels and lox, and speaks the same language, and has the same value system, and the same traditions. So cultural, it doesn't seem to hold water to the typical, you say, cultural identity. Let's talk about some others that are even on here. National identity. Well, okay, State of Israel, that had its name, but before that, and even with that, is every Jew Israeli? What about before Israel? So obviously, for 2,000 years, we were Jewish and scattered. Nationality, I mean, it's a huge priority. But I should point out, that's new. In the scheme of things, it's a new thing. That's the past 200 years, even less. 150 years, maybe, in the 1870s when Herzl started really getting steam. But, obviously there was Jews before that. Well, you could say, well, we were a displaced nationality for 2,000 years, and then we got the nationality back. Even today, with many Jews, is it a given we are Israeli? I mean, we love our brothers and sisters Israel. That's not the question. But is that definition of every Jew in the world?
Abraham Avino wasn't from Israel.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Thank you. A matter of what you do. Similar to culture or religious. No, it doesn't, you can just do zero. A Jewish person can say, I don't do anything Jewish and still consider themselves Jewish. And we consider them Jewish. Judaism considers them Jewish. There's other things I want to talk about. There's some things. This is all taken from a book by Steinsaltz called "We Jews, Who Are We, and What Do We?" This question of discussion. Dean Steinsaltz, big writer, thinker, scholar. He wrote a book called "We Jews, Who Are We? What Do We Do Now?" And he has one on this question. So some people say we're a people with a shared history. That sounds a little better, right? Like in modern terms. We're a people, so although we're all over the world, we're in South America and China and in Russia and everywhere, but we were bound by a shared history. So that sounds a little better because you can go back and have identity even though there's dispersion. But that too doesn't hold water because I'll give you an example. Let's say today, did what is it called? 23andMe? And people found out that they are strongly rooted from the ancient Babylonians. And there are millions of these people. Well, that's it. We're going back to Iraq, we're reclaiming Babylon, and we're Babylonians, right? It's not going to happen. Because a shared, particularly old history is not a significant identity is not just a little like fad you take up knitting and then it's not a small thing you just dip in and out of. It's a very personal, deep-rooted thing. And a shared history, particularly when there's a lot of in between, doesn't become that significant to what you are now, which is why I don't think if you would find millions of ancient, descendants of ancient Babylonians, it would be like, okay, whatever, like things happen in between, American, I'm Canadian, whatever. Reminds me of a joke from Ghostbusters. It wouldn't be we couldn't get through this without a reference there. So when they're in the scene before they say, are you mean to tell me that an ancient Babylonian god is going to descend upon New York City? He said, no, Sumerian. It's not like, as if Americans, Sumerian and Babylonian, like there's no. So anyways, so we went through a bunch, I think maybe some other things in that book, but it's clearly elusive of what it could be. There's China, Chinese, French, nationality, cultural identity. You have within China the Uyghurs, whatever, different Uyghurs. You get religious, maybe religious identity. But let's go to so it's back to our joke of the guy in film. So is Judaism just another red string? Like, is it something external? Well, we're going to see that it is not, because a Jew is a Jew, which means Western world, particularly with modernity, is you can choose your identity. You have the freedom to choose not just what you want to do, but who you're going to be. Right? My father was a butcher, and I'm going to be the president of the United States. No problem. Right? That's actually what every Disney movie tells you from a young age, is that you can be whatever you want to be. Even if it's not true. Okay. Let's go to text number 7. Groucho Marx loved this. He loved this little joke with Otto Kahn, who didn't like that he was a Jew, and he was worth $100 million. This is in the 30s, 40s. He was a great patron to the Metropolitan Opera in New York. He's walking down Fifth Avenue with Marshall Wilder, who had a hunchback. As they walked, they passed the synagogue. John turned to Wilder and says, I used to be a Jew. And Wilder says, yeah, I know, I used to be a hunchback. And Groucho Marx apparently loved telling this over. Why did he find it so funny? And what does it reveal to us about Jewish identity? So What do you think? What's the cute? Why is this funny? Like, oh, like I used to be a Jew. Like, why is it so silly to us to say that? If someone says I used to be, I grew up Catholic. You get I grew up Catholic, right? I mean, I'm not. I grew up that way. I'm no longer. Okay, that's legitimate.
That's anti-Semitism, right?
Sorry,
That is anti-Semitism.
we'll get to that as well. So that's another one. I just actually, you know what? So if you want to say we're Jews by common Jewish destiny, which is code for we're Jews because there are people who hate us. And we have the destiny to survive and to overcome. That again it's a non-essential definition. It's putting the definition on somebody else is doing something to you and then you're reacting, but it's not even define something. If I throw a baseball up in the air, it's a thing that's like, what is that? What's the thing flying in the air? It's an ancillary thing to it. It's not what it is. But Judaism is a given identity. So this is going to talk one verse, and there are other verses in the Torah. Text 8a, Banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. You are all children of the Lord your God. Moshe told the Jews, you're children. And by the way, we see this language where the children of Israel, B'nai Yisrael, B'nai Israel, not called Jews till the Megillah, by the way. The term Yehudi didn't exist for another like couple thousand years. Let's decide. But the original term is B'nai Yisrael, and the name is very telling. And here it says, "You're children of God. God is your father." Okay. In 8b, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, not the same story, but in his book the Tanya, famous chapter 32, he writes that they are all compatible having one father, meaning all Jews are compatible because they have one father in heaven. And therefore, all Israelites are called actual brothers because their souls have a common source in the one God. Key words, they're actual. He writes actual. He mamash means actual brothers. I mean, not we're brotherly, we're like, connected, we're bonded like brothers, we have a bromance, these terms. We're actual brothers. I mean, we're actual family. Okay, wait a sec. We have to unpack that. So we're given the term that we are family. Now, can we think how that might be, that might be a good definition, what some challenges to that might be? Family, like, let's go through some, you're saying we have like racial blood that connects us? A big challenge that would be, a convert who converts, according to Torah, and there's Jews and else. They don't have the racial, DNA. So it's a challenge to that, saying family. So wait, okay, that's fine. So that's actually a good point. So you're saying it would be adopted. Very good. That's actually a very good term. So I want to point out, we say that you are children of the Lord your God, meaning God's the Father. We're a family. We're all family. God has no grandchildren. We're all God's children. We're all family. We're not like a family. Okay. One big mishpacha. You know that like cutesy, folksy term? We're mishpacha. But in truth, we're not like a family. The concept, this is why Judaism will look at this, is saying that everything exists in a spiritual archetype, in a concept. And then it becomes examples how it plays out in the physical world. So, meaning things exist the way it exists by God. And then that becomes like, truisms or at least true concepts. And then they trickle down, they're manifest in the physical realms, as we know as a concept, a tree, an ox. I mean, there's a concept of tree in spiritual terms, in spirituality. There's a concept of animal in spirituality. There's a concept of family in spirituality. I mean, it starts in the spiritual cosmos and then it becomes a physical example. In other words, because we're this spiritual family, we're connected with a kind of we'll talk about what it means to be a family. That's really families what families have. You look at a family here, you're looking at that is the derivative of the spiritual concept of family. I don't want to get too philosophical, but let's say what is a family? A family means what are some details of family? Family versus fraternity. What's the fraternity? Fraternal brothers, brothers, sorority, fraternity, sorority, in a family.
You can't really choose.
You can't choose. That's it. You can't. I hate this fraternity. I'm out of here. I'm out of this family. You can leave the family, but you're still technically connected to the family, even if you don't like it. And so also it's chosen for you. You don't get to opt in. It's your parents are your parents. We can disassociate from them, but they are still the parents. What's another characteristic how you might see we're like family? What? AB? No, so I'm saying souls is that we're a soul family. How does that play out we think like a family? Like we fight to the brink of civil war, in Israel. If somebody else wants to attack us, now we're all going to fight back against it. How dare you fight my fellow Jew? Like you were fighting your fellow Jew a minute ago. Like, what are you so upset about? No, like I can pick on my little brother. You cannot pick on your little brother. It's just the way it goes. So this is, in other words, there's a term in modern science called epigenetics, which means that not genetics is physical DNA passing down, but that a person's traumatic experiences or big experience in life actually gets passed down to their children. So fascinating. I don't know much about it, but something along those lines of where, if a parent went through a traumatic episode, that gets, without them ever telling the child about it, it passes down to the child on some level. The child has to deal with that baggage. Someone said, if your father had a secret desire of being a trapeze artist his whole life, but he was, a lawyer, a desk job instead. He had this path, and he never told you that he wanted to be a trapeze artist. You have a very great likelihood of wanting to be a trapeze artist. It's a fascinating passing of not just DNA, but of shared memory or shared psyche. And that is exactly the Jewish people. We have shared psyche. We are because of our souls, and we're part of this, chosen by God to be part of this epic Jewish mission. And we're bonded in it. Text 10a explains, is from Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz. Text 10a, one can go so far to say that Judaism as a religion is simply the way of a particular family. So Jewishness is being part of a family. But Judaism is how our family thinks and does certain things. And then, we could be family and have very different opinions and fight, but we're family. That's the Jewishness. Judaism is the way we typically families have shared isms, mannerisms, and the way they do things. That's Judaism. It's even interesting. Some mention on the Zoom, and it's worthy of noting. So just to sum it up, your unchangeable identity. Jewish people are literally family. As a parent, every Jewish sibling. Jewish identity is unchangeable reality. And family DNA is chosen, one cannot alter the connection. So spiritually, it's the same thing. So I want to just go to text 10b before I add about Abraham and Sarah creating this family. For some of our people, it's almost like the story of the duckling who was hatched by a hen. An egg rolled away, and from the duck, it rolled into the hen's nest, and chick, duck. But he didn't know it was a duck because everybody's acting like a chicken. And often enough, we have the same thing. Our ducklings grow up in a different atmosphere, right? Jewish kid grows up in a non-Jewish public school or culture. And they're taught to think and act in ways that are alien to the way ducks should be or Jews should be. In general, and as we all know, finding out that you have some secret family past you never knew about is a huge literature thing. Harry Potter, right? It's a huge, happens all the time. It's a very common thing of the hero, the heroine, discovering they're really part of this secret, ancient past, family. So the thing is, if the discovery comes soon enough, the person is not only able to acknowledge the fact that he belongs somewhere, at least he buried in the right graveyard, but also to make his life in a way more sensible. If the duck goes the duck's life thinking it's a chicken, there's going to be a certain sense of frustration. If someone, by the way, you're a middle-aged duck, but you're not a chicken, you're a duck. You're middle-aged. It's going to be very helpful. It's a bombshell, but it's helpful to know, okay, where's my family? Where's my coming home? Where's my people? There's a feeling of alienation where you don't know who you are. It doesn't say this in the textbook, but just to the 15 more minutes. How this work? Just give you a little bit. Abraham and Sarah, right? They did not have children for many years. And Abraham went through 10 tests of showing complete and utter devoted loyalty to God at the highest level. And, the test of Abraham to the point of sacrificing his son, and he literally was willing to give everything of himself to God. Well, when he did that, he became a different type of person. He became a complete servant of God. His psyche became a servant of God. Sarah as well, because Sarah was his partner and everything. And that's why God says, okay, you're now going to have a people that's going to be servants of God, or role models of being a servant of God. And this kind of epigenetics, as we spoke about, or spiritual genetics, was promised to go and to pass down to his children. And it did to Isaac, to Jacob. It culminated. It didn't happen like right away. It started then, and it was kind of tweaked by Yitzchak and tweaked by Jacob, Israel, and there's the 12 tribes. And the Jews, it kept on going till they went to Mount Sinai, went through the exile, went through the splitting of the Red Sea, and then went to the Torah at Har Sinai. And that was the culmination of this collective spiritual identity. And once they had that, it became that, yes, this will pass on to this people continue to be Abraham Saraites of, his servants of God, chosen to be a servant of something higher than himself. It's interesting that there's the technicalities of kind of the way the Torah talks about it. And it fits somewhat well with science, like, it seems like, oh, you're just saying that. No, like people that do stuff, the psyche actually passes down. So Abraham did it to a whole different level. And the people of Israel, as kept with it in the hardest of times in Egypt, it does something to them, to their psyche, and that passes down. Again, it's not racial and physical and DNA. It's a spiritual identity, but it becomes meshed with the biological identity. The spiritual mission and identity becomes enmeshed in the physical Jew, and that gets passed down. Now, if someone converts, what do you do about that? Either you're in or you're out. What do you do? So we say in Torah law, the expression for a convert is a ger shemet gayer, a convert who converts, which means not a Gentile converts, it's a convert who converts. It's a little redundant because the belief is ultimately that a convert is really a Jewish soul that has to choose it in its lifetime by going through the same. For whatever reason, it's a soul. Why it had to have a different path to get there. It's a different discussion, but the Jewish soul. It's a Jewish soul. There has to be kind of manifest and formalize that Jewish 100% identity, even physically, by choosing the same things that the Jews did by Mount Sinai, which was going to the Red Sea, which is mikvah, getting the Torah, Mount Sinai. If it's a man, circumcision. But it's the same. It's really this. But why the God makes like that kind of lost soul having to find its way back? It's a separate discussion. It's not even this whole topic. So in here, I think it's important to the fullness of the discussion to talk about how that happens. But it was this Abraham, Sarah, transformed identity that passed their children and fully developed through the giving of the Torah, and then from then on, that became the Jew. Okay. So back to okay. I'm going to share a time when you felt like you'd come home to your Jewish family, like a feeling when you felt disconnected from Judaism. Then there was a time like, I'm with my people. I want to share a time, a visit to Israel, a city in Israel, a scene. Anything to Israel, Jerusalem particularly. There's a feeling of like, I'm with my people. It can like,
Oh, no. Well, with my people, it fun. Like I think there's an energy, there's sex.
right. Okay, cool. Thank you. We'll still be the $20 after.
Well, I know I live in Philadelphia.
We talked about that a lot, right? The Simchat Torah.
First shot on 3, and that was just great.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back. So now we talked about Jewish identity. Let's talk about Napoleon's attack on Jewish identity. Napoleon gets a rap as being this great lover of the Jewish people. He emancipated, the first to emancipate the Jewish people. He was not. Napoleon wanted domestic obedience at all costs. That was the main thing. And, he was willing to give freedoms. He probably had some ideology, to be fair. But it came with total obedience to the state. There's no dual allegiance going on. And in text 11 on page 16, Count Clermont-Tonnerre, I forget to pronounce that, who was one of the people addressing in the French ministers by Napoleon. What to do with the Jews? The Jews are this sub-nation, nation within a nation. So he says, to the Jews as a nation, nothing. We're not giving anything. But as individuals, as Frenchmen, everything. And this is in asserting the Jews of Europe share with each other only their common faith. Judaism's a faith thing, not a, family identity thing. That makes the primary loyalty to the country. You're a Frenchman, and you have more in common with your fellow Frenchman than your Jewish English brother. The point of irony, by the way, many Jews did advocate for this because they wanted the freedom. It's a religion. And those Jews weren't religious. It's like text 12 is a fascinating topic. The Parisian Sanhedrin. Is that in the movie, I wonder? In the Napoleon movie? It doesn't even get.
Yeah.
It's not relevant enough. Yeah.
Very much more about it.
Like any movie. Right, exactly. So Napoleon, he basically set up a Sanhedrin. Now, a Sanhedrin is the temple era Supreme Court of rabbis. Didn't exist in 1400 years until Napoleon. It's not allowed to. We don't have a temple. We don't make a Sanhedrin. We don't make that 72 body of supreme religious leaders. But he said, we're making a Sanhedrin. This hubris, like this arrogance. We're going to make it. And he set up 12 questions to them. If you want to hear more, there's a podcast called History for the Curious, a Jewish history and modernity, not just modernity of the past, post-temple and diaspora. And he asked 12 questions like, is a Jewish divorce needed to do a get? Is a get, the Jewish divorce, bill of divorce, needed for a divorce? Or is it good enough to have a French bill of divorce? Are Jews prohibited from intermarriage? Big 12 questions. And this group was some of them religious rabbis, some not, some were very liberal, almost lay people, but he wanted his body, and he wasn't asking what his Talmud said. He wanted them to give answers that we're going to change Jewish law to make it that the Jew has allegiance to you. So we're going to go through all those questions. Some of the rabbi kind of like they tried to skirt around it. They didn't say the truth. They didn't say the lie. Like, for example, about the bill of divorce, what they answered was a Jewish bill of divorce is needed after you get the French bill of divorce. Not because in Judaism, you don't have a get, you're not divorced. It's a big problem. They didn't say it. They said you got to get a French one first. So we're very allegiant. We have a lot of allegiance. Like they had to sidestep it, a lot of stuff, because they didn't really have a choice. But one of the questions was on page 18 is, the Jews born in France and treated by the laws as French citizens consider France their country, or do they, Zion is Israel their country? So he says they answered, the love of country is in the heart of a Jew, a sentiment so natural, so powerful, and so constant to their religious opinions, that a French Jew considers himself in England as among strangers, although he may be among Jews. And the case the same with English Jews in France. That's that answer. The point of the Sanhedrin was to get, look, we're going to give you freedoms. We'll let you have some you can do religion privately. There's no authority in your allegiance to your Jewish religion. Privately choose to do that, but there's no, until then, a lot of Jews in countries had, like, the bodies of Jews, they sort of self-governed a lot to some degree. I mean, some more, some less, but he wanted Jews to give their underlying allegiance to each other, and because they identify as a Jewish family is a separate allegiance, it would prevent them from identifying fully with France. And this is just the proclamation. Now, Jonathan Sachs, I'm not going to read, but on page 19, I'll just say a little bit. Jewishness for the first time is no longer the primary mode of identity. Now, according to Sanhedrin, transformation to be achieved without, they said, we could become Frenchmen first, but still in accordance with Jewish law, halacha. But it was not long, we're going to see, where they tried to change halacha. As a matter of fact, later on, I'm sorry, where does it say this? Oh, as a matter of fact, so Jonathan Sachs says, Judaism depends on distinctiveness. Like, we celebrate differentness of people. And we need to be different to survive, to be a people. Not that we're being like to do it in despite or in spite of people, but to be distinctiveness is a very big part of Judaism. This is what Haman hated. He says there's a distinction, they're scattered, they have a different set of laws, and you can't stand. That's what Haman told Achashverosh. But this difference is key to Jewish survival. But now, to the enthusiasts of its emancipation, it's a problem. We got to get rid of distinctiveness. It was a big obstacle. In 1808, Napoleon got very anti-Semitic. Because 15 years went by, the Jews weren't like as integrated as he was hoping, that they would integrate and assimilate pretty quickly. So he actually changed that now. Consistoires was like a Jewish council that was state, and to this day it exists. The consistoire, it's like a French Jewish council that's authorized by the state, and they control every aspect of life. You have to go through them. You can't make a separate synagogue. Like, there's no making a separate synagogue. It has to go through them. As a matter of fact, the consistoire, they tried to make it that it was a rabbinical body, but at some point there was a call to make it lay-led, like non-rabbis could change the rules of Jewish life. Didn't pass, but you understand where this was going. The government, Napoleon, against some of his ministers, he voided large amounts of debt owed to Jewish moneylenders, because he said they're manipulating the loyal Frenchmen, and Jews could not hire replacements when drafted. It was very common in the Civil War. You were allowed to pay money, to someone else take your place in the war, in the draft. Wasn't allowed for Jews. Let's skip this. Okay. Reaching towards the end, so you're going to finish up. Text 15. Adin Steinsaltz also writes here, as long as Jews retain their independent spiritual character, their religious principles, their internal leadership, and their distinctive way of life, the Jewish people were never truly enslaved. The Middle Ages might have been very dark, but it did nothing to diminish the brilliance and the spiritual creativity and the flourishing of Jewish scholarship and Jewish communities and Jewish continuity, because they didn't, while yes, they have to pay taxes and they have to deal with the harshness of the different countries, their host countries, they did not have to, they found they identified. That wasn't they had to deal with. But who they are, we're Jewish, we have our own Jewish way of life, we're a family, we have a way of life that we answer to. We have our parents, we have our, our leaders, and that was their home, and that's how they could survive in exile. So we see end up with Ed Koch. Ed Koch was the mayor of New York. This is he's buried in Manhattan, and on his tombstone, he asked to have written, "Father is Jewish, mother is Jewish, I am Jewish." Daniel Pearl, 2002, just before he was beheaded by Muslim terrorists. It's funny because Ed Koch was not a religious guy. This is what he wanted written. He wrote Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad, and writes there on the bottom of his epitaph. So if you had to write, which to end for us, you can take a last learning exercise. If you had to write one sentence about your identity to help your great-grandchildren know you, what would you write? This is on page 23. Pencil. Right.
It's hard to write it in, yeah.
I know. It's a lot to still think about it. You can write it maybe next week. It's a good thing. Writing one, it's a good question. It's if you want, your great grandchild to think like, what is it? What was important to you? What would you want them to know? And once you know that, you could say, well, how could I incorporate that to my day-to-day life? So we're going to do a little bit of summary video of the key points.
Key points.
Okay. There we go.
1. The Jewish experience of the last 200+ years can help us make informed choices about what it means to be Jewish. We can learn about our Jewishness from the recent past as well as from biblical and Talmudic times. 2. The free world has opened up the possibility for Jews to choose whether or not to identify as a Jew, something unimaginable to the pre-modern Jew. 3. Being Jewish is not a secondary characteristic of our being. It is the primary element that defines who we are. It is spiritual DNA, constantly present within us, just as material DNA is found in every part of the body. 4. Jewishness cannot be reduced to membership in any category. It is not merely a religion, an ethnicity, citizenship in a nation, a people with a shared history, or a people who share a common destiny. Jewish identity is all-embracing. 5. Being Jewish is not similar to being part of a family. It is literally being part of a family, with God as parent and all other Jews as siblings. 6. A Jew's actions cannot affect his Jewish identity, but they do demonstrate the degree to which he is able to express his identity.
Okay, and just to next week, we're gonna do, I'm sorry. Okay, next week, we're gonna talk about, we talk about Napoleon and the first, experiment of Jewish modernity, but now we're gonna talk about the conflict between Western freedom and Jewish life. A lot of this we touched upon by the lecture, but we're gonna explore a little more. I do want to say in the back, you can take, I'm not sure, I might have to make copies because I don't know if they have any more of these textbooks to buy because it's an old course. But in the back, I did make a full copy of not just the lesson we did. There's also addendum. There's some really good appendixes in the back as well. This is very important. If you want to know the comprehensive history of Napoleon, this is where I really love the additional readings on page 35 to the end is a really, really good history lesson about the details of Napoleon, to seeing that he wasn't such a, philo-Semite as, as he's, the good rap he gets, we're going to see very different. And, but it really gives a nice, not too long, about 5-6 pages long, but a comprehensive history lesson on that. So highly recommended. See you next week, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah. I remember when I was